Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is WeatherBrains episode number 802. 802. This is for the first day of June. Big day here. It's a Tuesday night special. This is the beginning of meteorological summer and the beginning of the Atlantic Basin hurricane season. It's that marvelous time of the show where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and of course, we say outrageous things. So let's get all the magical codes going here and get the guest invited. And we're going to start. And it's going to be another emotional show tonight. We're going to look back at Joplin, the Joplin, Missouri tornado. We have had so many big anniversaries since 2011 was such a big year for severe weather and tornadoes, and another big one tonight. But we opted to do the show tonight instead of last night because it was Memorial Day and a lot of folks just couldn't make it. So we thought, let's just do a Tuesday night special. So we're going to do a Tuesday night special. So we got the embed code going, and let's get everybody invited here. Hope you're having a good day. And you know what? They have officially released me. I am now out of the cage. I can speak in public again for the first time since March of 2020. Don't know if I remember how to do that, but we'll try. All right, let's get everybody added here and get everybody invited. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think they're all there. All right. Yeah, it'd be kind of exciting. Be hitting the road again. We'll be doing some book signings on Saturdays this summer in different places around the Southeast. And of course, when school gets back in session in August, I'll be back in the classroom again. I've not been in a public school building since March of 2020, which is really weird for me. This is the longest I've ever gone without being in one since I've started doing this, because I'm typically in a school every day doing school programs, at least one school a day, and it's all been virtual, which is okay. I mean, look, it beats nothing, but there's nothing like the electricity you can build up in a gym full of third graders. Just telling you, those are my people. So yeah, we'll announce the book schedule as soon as I get. In fact, I'm meeting with the publisher folks Friday, and I should know more about that. But we'll be hitting the streets and the roads in late June and July and August for that. That's always a lot of fun. We've had more fun doing the book signings over the years. I mean, it's just been great fun. The first book was Weathering Life, and we did that 2 years ago. And this is for the latest book, which is on April 27, 2011. The book is called All You Can Do Is Pray. And we meet some amazing people, hear some amazing stories, have a lot of fun, take a lot of pictures, have a lot of laughs. It's a good release for me. It's a great time. So we look forward to that. And that'll kick off late this month. And what else is going on? Take a vacation. I always take my first vacation week in June. And that first week will be coming up, let's see, June 21st through June 25th, which means we'll be doing 2 shows the week of the 14th. Probably do a Thursday or a Friday night special. This year, typically we go to some random baseball park, but this year it's our 40th wedding anniversary. Of course, I married when I was 6. But we're going to go to probably Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard. We go to Fenway every year. I know Boston better than Birmingham pretty much. But I have never been to Cape Cod, so that's the plan. So I'm sharing boring personal stories, Jen and Troy. That's what we do here on the pre-show. Boring personal stories.
Never
Hey, Jen.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you.
I see a cat.
She couldn't help herself. There she is. Say hi, everybody. Oh, she's so cute.
I just fed our black cat out here in the parking lot.
No.
This thing, we've had that cat for like 12 years, and it won't eat dry food anymore. It smells it and it just walks away. It will only eat that, expensive stuff that comes out of a can, which is just horrifying. I mean, this was a stinking stray cat here. And now it only eats the upper end cat food. So I don't know how that happened.
You should get Fancy Feast dry food. It's called filet mignon. I'm not kidding. That's what they eat. That's what they eat. Filet mignon.
The only animals that eat the dry food are the raccoons we have out here. And they'll eat the dry cat food. So, but the cat just smells it and walks away. All right. So let's see here. Getting all kind of people on here. I'm trying to think who I think I've invited all of our people.
Hey, Doug.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Yeah.
Hi there.
Hey, Andy.
Andy? Yeah.
Hi there.
What's up, Andy?
Hey, Doug. Good to see you.
Oh,
Yeah, you too.
Not invited.
Doug, McDonald's, is that the dinner planned this evening?
Yeah, we're in Seattle. My son's doing a clinical trial, so we're just kind of grub hubbing food left and right. And I think we're going to go to the Ferris wheel later. So yeah, we're just having a good time.
Awesome.
Got to do what you got to do, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's good. Did I see some heat advisories for Western Washington State today, like Spokane?
It's warm. It's not like hot to our standards. It's like 82, and people are freaking out here.
Death-defying heat wave strikes the Pacific Northwest. It's 82 degrees. No, it's all relative. They mock us for the winter storms and stuff. It's just it's all relative. Troy, how's your house coming, man?
It's not going like I'd like it to, but I have told the builders, you can imagine this since you all know me. I've told the builders that I am moving back in the 1st of July. And they kind of looked at me and said, well, and I said, then you'll be doing it around me. I'm moving back in July 1, and at least the bed's going back in and an internet connection to the office. But no, I think they're doing okay. And Bill, I'm tiring of the Hilton experience, so it's.
Well, you're probably a double gold platinum plus member.
I became diamond pretty quick. But the house is. I'm looking at a picture of it. They're putting down tile today and things like that. But I get a new house out of the winter storm, if nothing else, for a deductible $3,000. So there you go.
So the question is, do they have the waffle machine working again down in the breakfast area?
No, they do not, and they do not have the evening.
And that's a sticking point, James. You shouldn't have brought that up.
but they also know evening receptions. There's nothing social here at all, and I don't blame the people here. I think they're great. I think it's a Hilton corporate deal. But
the waffle iron's coming back, but it's just going to be a little bit longer, they said. You're going to come back in 3 flavors.
Well, James is waiting because he has a deal going with the Hilton across the street from the hotel, from the TV station. So
yeah, they still don't have their waffle machine out. I mean, it's like, come on, man. All right,
you're probably like my son who used to come in he'd leave for school early, and I'd be like, Chris, where are you going? He'd go, I'm going to eat breakfast. I said, they don't feed you at school. He said, no, we eat at the Holiday Inn Express every morning.
Yeah. That's the plan. All right, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
WeatherBrains is brought to you by Midland Weather Radio. Every home, school, and business should have a NOAA Weather Radio, the official voice of the National Weather Service. And the AMS Weather Band.
Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band. The AMS Weather Band is a global community of weather enthusiasts dedicated to learning and sharing their love of science. Visit amsweatherband.org to learn more and join the band today.
WeatherBrains episode number 802. 802. This is for the 1st of July. For those of you watching live, it is a Tuesday night special. We're glad you're here. First day of the Atlantic hurricane season. First day of meteorological summer.
James, you said the 1st of July. I assume you meant the 1st of June, right?
Yeah, no, I'm not. I've not slept since the 1st of July last year.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the problem. So it's the 1st of June. Yes. I'm going to take a nap here in 3 weeks. I take my first vacation week in 3 weeks, and I will come back human again. So yeah, June, July, August, whatever. It's like summer to me. So Troy, how you doing, man? What's happening down in Austin, Tejas?
Well, we've been stuck, as Jeff and everybody else can tell you, we've been stuck in this weakness in the atmosphere since about the early and middle part of May. And it doesn't look like we get out of it. At Austin Bergstrom International Airport, 12.5 inches of rain for May, which is 7 inches above average. And at my co-op station in that place where I used to live, about 4 miles that way, my rainfall for the month was over 10 inches. So it's been really interesting. And that weakness is not giving up real. It looks like another 2 to 4 inches of rain maybe in the next week or so. And temperatures below average. Troy's loving it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't stand heat waves and I can't stand droughts. They are the worst to deal with, just the absolute worst. So a weakness and a ridge makes me smile.
Yep.
So that's a good thing. Jen, do you have a weakness in your ridge?
We were only in the 50s for the highs just a few days ago. We're finally, it was very chilly, but we are going to get back to normal over the next couple of days. We're going to get this low in here, and we should see some pretty good rain for the next couple of days. And then we get a little warmish for the weekend, but I'll take it. It's just all over. I mean, we're talking 30-degree swings here, so I don't know how to dress at this point. But not too shabby up here in Flavortown right now.
Awesome. People down here in the Deep South, they were griping it was too cold over the Memorial Day weekend. You don't hear that a lot in late May down here. We had some lows in the 40s, and people are trying to swim and go to the lake and all this. And but anyway, to me, it's very refreshing. So Aubrey, how cold has it been up in Harrisonburg? What was your low over the weekend?
It was pretty cool. So I was just looking up our high. We hit 56 on Sunday. We were 46, and 47 over the weekend. Of course, we had a midnight high on Saturday, and I think we only got to maybe 54 in the afternoon for Saturday. So it was quite the chilly day. Sunday was better because we were able to get a little sun in the afternoon. Everything kind of pushed out, and it wasn't bad for the afternoon. Of course, yesterday was beautiful. It wasn't 90, but it was low 70s, which is almost unheard of for Memorial Day. But boy, was it comfortable and refreshing, because by this time next week, we should be at least around 90.
Yep. Enjoy it while we got it. But Bill Murray, we've got some brain power and some legends on this show, and it's an important topic. So take it and let's bring them in. Let's go.
Yeah, James, tonight's show has been heavily influenced by a friend of the podcast, Steve Holmes. Steve, we thank you for all your input and suggestions. But as everyone knows, on May 22nd, 2011, one of the deadliest tornadoes in U.S. history struck Joplin, Missouri, killing 161 people. That EF5 tornado impacted about a third of that city of a 50,000 population. And as a result, it was the first single tornado to cause over 100 fatalities in the U.S. since the Flint tornado in June of 1953. So we've had a lot of emotional shows tonight, but this is unfortunately going to be another one. But tonight's first guest weather brain has been the chief meteorologist at WOAM in Joplin, Missouri since 2003. He holds the NWA seal, the AMS's certified broadcast meteorologist designation, and all kind of other accolades. Doug Hetty, we welcome you back to the show. In fact, you were the youngest Met to ever receive the AMS broadcast seal, right?
Yeah, it actually was. I started TV when I was 18 in a little tiny cable station in Lawrence, Kansas. We probably had about 10 to 15 viewers a night. It was so small. But back at that time, if you had 3 years of experience, you could go for your seal. And I went for it. Never thought I would get it, but I got it. I just turned 21. Probably should have been fatal for it because I was on the board for a while and I graded people. And if I pass, I don't know how other people pass. But but yeah, technically I am the youngest one.
Well, that's pretty awesome. Now you're in Seattle because your amazing son, and we know your family's gone through a lot of trials and tribulations here. And we really thank you for taking time to share this, time with us tonight. Is there anything you can give us a report on how things are going?
My son, he just turned 12. He's got, it's called DSRCT sarcoma cancer, extremely rare. It happens in preteen boys. It's when their chromosomes start bouncing off of each other. For some reason, his stuck. It's a terminal cancer, and we've been at it for about a year. They gave us 2 to 3 months, so we're very happy with where we're at right now. But it's a new T cell trial. It's where his immune system fights the own cancer, and so far it's going pretty good. And we're just trying to get some good time. But we made a lot of memories over the past year, so it's been worth it. This past year has been a lot of fun for us.
Doug, is there anything that we or our listener base can do to help out? I know these are always trying times, and there are always expenses piling up. Is there anything we can do?
Thankfully, we've been very blessed. We've done some fundraisers, and with our jobs, it has helped out a lot. So far, we haven't had to pay any money out of our pocket. So we've been so blessed with that and very thankful. But no, just continue to support, and we're continue to fight.
Well, you can count on that, and best of luck. Our thoughts and prayers are with you and your whole family. But we're really thankful that you're here with us tonight. So thank you for that. And tonight's second guest weather brain has a lot of acronyms in his title, and I'm not even sure it's the very latest one. Andy, I grabbed your position off the internet. It has a lot of PMOs and IDSSs, and some of those things I know what they are, but I didn't even try to decode it. So maybe you can give us a shot at filling in what some of those mean and what the correct information is.
Yeah, I hope I know what those mean. That's my title now. So, yeah, I work for the National Weather Service, and I currently work at National Weather Service headquarters as IDSS coordinator. And IDSS is Impact-Based Decision Support Services, which is linked to a topic we're talking about tonight. Prior to that, I had worked at Central Region headquarters as the IDSS program manager. And before that, I worked in Springfield, Missouri for most of my career of 20 years, which that juxtaposed with the events in Joplin back in 2011. But that really had an impact on me personally, certainly in my life, in my career, and what I'm doing as a Impact Decision Support Services coordinator, which is really built around communication and partnerships.
Well, and as you said, you were there on that fateful day. So we're very honored to have you here with us tonight, and we thank you for taking time to join us.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
And our third weather brain is no stranger to the show, having appeared on several shows. I think you're in the running like the Alec Baldwin of weather brains, Jeff Piotrowski. How have you been? We haven't talked to you in too long.
Been great. Just got back from chasing out on the planes for a couple of weeks, seen some pretty crazy stuff. So it's been very busy, and I'm glad the pandemic's getting behind us, and had all my vaccines and ready to travel, and we're ready for business. And Barron's been stepping on the gas pedal the last 15 months with behind the scenes, and we're coming out with the 800-pound hammer, man. We are the hammer with the weather business. So as you guys have heard, so we're very busy.
Well, you were definitely a magnet for crazy things, Jeff Piotrowski, and unfortunately that intersected with the town of Joplin back on this fateful day in 2011. So we're glad to have you here tonight for some of your recollections and your thoughts. And Kim Cloco-McLean has joined us from Norman. So Kim, we want to recognize that you're here, and we're very glad that you are tonight, because we'll look for your absolutely discerning input throughout the conversation tonight. So I guess, I'd like to go back to that day. Start with you, Andy. It was kind of not really a straightforward severe weather day. It was advertised pretty well from what I can tell. So, take us back and kind of share the meteorological setup with us, and
right,
sure, what it was about.
Yeah, and I can remember all the specifics to the details and all the parameters, but certainly remember we're expecting severe weather that day. And that's not uncommon in Southwest Missouri and Southeast Kansas, as Doug can attest to. It was another event where we're expecting severe storms, the possibility of tornadoes, again, not that uncommon. And I was going to work an evening shift that day. And so going out, the idea is a slight, maybe a moderate risk, a risk of tornadoes, and just kind of gearing up for what that means from a lead forecaster. and working, within the weather service, and you're thinking about strategy, you're thinking about staffing, you're thinking about the meteorology and all that goes into, and who we're going to be coordinating with, how do we do that? A lot goes into that preparation, but one of those things in preparation before I went to work that day, and this is probably not uncommon for any meteorologist or weather enthusiast, you really go out after looking at all the analysis and observations, you go outside and just get a sense. What does it feel like? What's the weather feel like? And I remember so vividly walking out of the house that Sunday afternoon and just feeling the oppressiveness of the atmosphere. It was so hot and humid. As I recall, the Capes might be 6,000 locally. I may be wrong on that, but it was very high. But it felt like it. And I just remember just feeling like this does not feel right. This is not typical, even for Missouri, which is very humid. This does not feel the same. And that was just a sense I had. And one thing I did that day, and I've only done this twice in my career. I've been working with the service for 28 years. I went back to my late wife and I said, can you pray for us today? Because it just doesn't feel right. And I'd done that once before, and it was an outbreak of tornadoes back in 2003. So that's the kind of feeling I had just going into the event that day before even arriving at work. Something, certainly had potential. That I think that was the idea. And that was certainly laid out in the forecast and Storm Prediction Center and the expectations we had. But certainly at that point, didn't know exactly what we're going to be dealing with.
And so, Doug, going into that weekend, what do you remember about the lead up to the event?
Well, it was a little different than like the May 4th 03 also hit the Joplin area. As Jeff knows, I still remember he has a famous chasing video where he's saying the train's on the tracks, the train's on the tracks. And that hit Carl Junction, a suburb of Joplin. That day was, you knew 3-4 days out that it was going to be a monster event. But on the Joplin tornado, because it occurred on a Sunday, on Friday, it was like, yeah, okay. And then Saturday, I remember checking things and I was like, And then Sunday, because it was the week before Memorial Weekend around Missouri and many areas in the U.S., we all go to the lake. So I was cleaning the boat, and as Andy said, it was hot and it was very windy, and I kept going in checking SPC, and it, just like Andy said, it just didn't feel right. But we had the severe weather risk. We knew it several days in advance. It just really came together as we went into that Sunday, especially late morning, early afternoon.
So Jeff, you've been watching this day. You obviously chased that event. Talk about what stood out to you about it.
Well, it's back up. It's back up 24 hours. So 24 hours for the Joplin event. If you remember, we actually had tornadoes up on I-70 just near Topeka the afternoon before. Kathy and I chased tornadoes near a mobile home park up there. Almost got hit. So as we were on our way back the night before, we knew the atmosphere was ready and prime and ready, and we knew there was a wave coming out of Arizona that night. It was probably to be near Wichita or just in central Oklahoma the following day with the left front, part of the jet core coming in northeast Oklahoma ahead of the dry line and ahead of the wave. And I told Kathy, I said, tomorrow's going to be probably a big day. And we got home at about 11 o'clock that night before. Got up the next morning, read the SPC outlook. It was very straightforward, I thought, as far as their intensity and what they were saying was going to happen. And as the data started coming in that morning, we left the house here, I think about 10:30, headed up to southeast Kansas. And things got real interesting pretty quick as the day unfolded.
And so early on that day, it appeared the main threat might be large hail, and SPC upgraded to moderate on their 8 a.m. outlook, and then PWO was issued, and your office put out a special balloon at noon that day, right, Andy?
That's right. We did a special release that day. I don't remember what the parameters were exactly came back on, except that it showed explosive atmosphere. So that was pretty evident, as I recall, coming back from that event. And I think Doug and Jeff alluded to, certainly we're expecting severe weather. We were not expecting an outbreak. It wasn't like a normally different day from a severe weather standpoint, I think, first going into it. But we knew that's possibility of tornadoes, and maybe not that many, but there was that possibility. And given what the atmosphere was showing us, if you got one, right, possibly it could be a strong one.
And as the day went on, how did your messaging change? How did what sort of events were going on behind the scenes in the office?
Yeah, just some recollection from that point, and really when I came on, I mean, they would advertise that threat. Certainly, I think SBC provided great background, as I recall, on that, and advertising that chance for large hail and local, isolated tornadoes, possibility of it, that kind of thing. So the watch, I believe, went out a few hours before, up to 4 hours, as I recall, sometime early afternoon. So the expectations that we're going to see development, and given the atmosphere, I mean, obviously, then look at that sound, as I recall, that the explosive nature of development could certainly occur, given the atmosphere we're dealing with, and once it uncapped, and which is we, ultimately saw. So the messaging, within our products was potential severe weather, possible tornadoes, had the watch out, and at that point, begin to that's just really the advent of in Weather Service. I really begin to use social media more frequently. And we're doing that, beginning to get the message out that way. Also NWS chat, that was becoming a more integral part of the Weather Service at that time, coordinating with media and core partners, emergency managers in doing that. So getting messaging out that way. So there were some things already, play that were sort of I can't remember exactly the timelines on those, but you were in the sense of using these tools to begin to communicate these kinds of things. And so then it became, a kind of like a lot of events becomes a waiting game. You're waiting for things to begin to happen. How will it evolve? Where will the first explode? And what are you going to see? What kind of, from a storm characteristic standpoint, is going to unfold? So, and I remember even before the event, just we had, I think it's 6 staff there. We kind of prep for additional staff, and really the calmness, of the staff, in terms of we're ready, we're waiting, and to see what would unfold.
And so talk about some of the challenges that you faced in that office, because I know you don't have a lot of homes that have basements there. What are some other challenges that made the population a little more vulnerable potentially on that day? Andy, I'll start with you, and then I'll circle around to Doug and let Jeff throw in anything on that question, because that's an interesting part of this to me.
I think with any event, it's all about communication. I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot tonight. And and that day, it's a weekend, it's a Sunday. People are out and about. A lot of graduations going on. Hearing about severe weather, not that uncommon, obviously. And so, can you tell someone, before a Joplin type of event, that kind of a tornado beforehand, that you're going to see that? Obviously, you can't, you don't have that kind of information. You said there's the potential. So how do you get that across? I think messaging the magnitude and severity of any event is difficult, because each weather event has its own fingerprint. And how do you accurately try to characterize it in a way that, those listening, the general public, how can you get that across? And that's where I think the partnerships, obviously with Doug and media, becomes such an important role here. I'm sure we'll talk about in helping to fully, flesh those messages out in time. But this is, I guess, more of a challenge, just because it's severe weather expected, but to say you're going to have this kind of event beforehand, obviously impossible. So that's as I look back on it, you wish you could say that, wish you could have said that. There's nothing to say you're going to have a Joplin tornado day.
Now it's kind of challenging because you've got 3 CWAs kind of coming together there, right? Is that correct?
That's right. You've got Wichita, Tulsa, and Springfield, or Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. And Doug certainly can attest to the challenge of you dealing with different Weather Service offices coming together there, radar coverages, and that kind of thing. So he can probably speak more to that. But from a coordination standpoint, that's very important from that realm as well. And especially when you cross those county warning area borders.
Doug, speak to that for a second. Has that made your job more difficult? Some of those factors.
So many meteorologists, we deal with areas that have several NWS offices. When they're coordinating great together, it's usually pretty good. And I think like Wichita storms coming out of southeastern Kansas, and then Tulsa out of northeastern Oklahoma, and then to Springfield, they all coordinate really well. So that's never been a huge issue. I think one big thing back then is, we didn't have Facebook Live. I didn't even have a a professional page until the day after. I remember I put a Facebook, like on the station page, like a message saying environment is getting right, going to work. We just didn't have the communication ability that we have today, where, back then you almost had to be sitting at home watching TV, when today, I mean, you could be anywhere and real quickly what's going on.
So Doug, sort of set the stage for us with the county names, because Joplin sort of straddles that county line. Talk about the counties that are involved, not only in Missouri, but also back to the west in southeastern Kansas, northeastern Oklahoma.
Yeah, we're an interesting city because we're actually a city of 250,000 people, the metro area, but we're a very sprawled city. It takes 25 minutes to go from west to east. And it's a lot of Joplin's the anchor city, and we have a lot of smaller towns around it. But yeah, it covers Jasper County, Newton County, and then also Ottawa County in Oklahoma, and then also Cherokee County in southeastern Kansas. So they all kind of anchor together. But, on that day, I mean, we had tornado warnings several hours before Joplin hit. I mean, Joplin hit around shortly after 5:30, and they were popping up in southeastern Kansas by 2:30, 3 o'clock. So it was a very long day. What was interesting about that day, and I remember thinking, and I kind of kicked myself for it, is it was one of those days that I'm sure, as James can attest to, it's one of those radar indicated tornado days. It's where we had all these radar indicated tornadoes, but nothing was really coming together. And then finally, 3 hours later, it finally came together. But to me at the time, which I look back on and kick myself, I wish I would have had my foot on the pedal a little bit harder.
So Andy, there's been this idea that maybe Springfield had too high of a false alarm ratio. What would you say to that? And talk about that issue. Do you think it was an issue at all with false alarm fatigue or siren fatigue in your community when you were there in Joplin?
There's been a lot said about that, obviously, and a lot of research done, especially from a social science perspective after the fact. And probably let those experts speak more to the statistics when it comes to false alarm. What I can say, though, as a warning operator, when you're in the weather service office, when it comes to making that determination to issue a warning, that is a difficult and very careful decision when you make it. So when you talk about false alarms and those kind of things, certainly there's warnings that produce and some. I mean, there's storms that produce some that don't. But when you're as a warning operator, you're taking all the science you have. You're taking all the observations you have. You're taking all the information, whether it's spotter reports, whatever you have at your disposal, to make a very important decision that's going to set off actions in response. And just know that the gravity of that decision is certainly understood when, as a warning operator, you issue that. So you're not thinking about or trying to think about false alarm or verification. You're thinking about what's the science, what is the information telling you? And as you know, as all of us as weather enthusiasts and meteorologists, not only you're a weather enthusiast, your other passion is to protect community. How can I inform the community, inform those that are in possible harm's way, to give them the best information possible? So from my perspective, that's how I look at it. And I think my cohorts largely would too, that you're just trying to get the best information out based on the best science and information at your disposal.
Was that an issue in the minds of the forecasters and meteorologists at the office at that time, that was a complaint, or is this something that popped up later?
I think there was more research after certainly that showed that and would have indicated that. But again, you try when you're in that on that side of the wall in the office, and you're trying to make those decisions. You're trying to just base it on, not be biased by whatever lean there is toward false alarms or anything else. You're trying to base it on what you see right there, because that could be the one. And in this day it was. That could be that devastating and deadly tornado, as any of those storms that we would warn on could be. And that's the way we approach that, making the best information based on the science that we have.
So Doug, do you feel like there was any propensity for the residents in the community to slough off the warning initially or anything like that, or is this a pretty weather savvy crew that we're dealing with in Joplin?
It's pretty weather savvy. I mean, I've thought about it over the past 10 years on what happened here. I can think of that whole spring had been very calm for us. We had several hours of tornado warnings prior to that, nothing was hitting the ground. Also, we didn't have any in Joplin. We didn't have any storms prior to this one. It was sunny. It was warm. It looked like the perfect day, and this thing just came together so fast. Everybody was at graduations, but no, I don't think there was any really warning fatigue or anything that was going into it. I just think it was kind of worst case scenario. It was just weird. I don't know if it could ever happen again.
So Jeff, you're up there knocking around in southeast Kansas watching these storms develop. What were your perceptions of them?
Earlier in the afternoon when the tornado watch came out, and watching the SPC Meso page, the winds were, things were up, and they were trying to rotate, but they weren't that classic look. They're more HP-ish. And I remember telling Kathy after there's several thunderstorm warnings and a couple of tornado warnings that I said, hey, it looks like the winds are a little bit more back farther southeast Kansas. And I remember SPC put a special out, and they highlighted northeast Oklahoma and southeast Kansas. They said speed max is approaching. The left front quadrant of the jet core is approaching. Things are going to ramp up. And so we started drifting to southeast Kansas, and I got over by Galena, and as far as southeast Kansas. And I remember there's a storm that went from severe to tornado warning. This is a tornado that went north of Joplin that started the initial tornado warning. And right before that happened, I like getting out of the car. I like feeling, look at the atmosphere. You just can't drive. You got to get out of the car. You got to look at 360 around you. What are the clouds doing? How fast are they moving? What are the winds doing? What's the upper winds doing? How much is it tilting over? You got to feel it. You got to look at it. You got to. It's like putting a piece of puzzle together. And there's no two tornadoes ever been alike. There's no two F5s ever been alike. There's the piece of puzzle. And when you start seeing those pieces of puzzle come together, you get a picture real quick. And I remember it was the only second time in history I've witnessed this. The other time was May 3rd, 99 in Lawton, Oklahoma. That was at the towers going into the main storm, south of it about 5 to 10 miles, were about 20,000 foot high, and they were spiraling so fast, it looked like barber poles rotating into the main parent tower, the back building line. And when I got outside and I looked up and I saw that happening, I got back in the car and I told Kathy, I said, something really bad's about to start happening. And she looked at me, she goes, why? And I told her, I said, hey, last time I saw this was May 3rd, 99. And about 3 minutes later, the first tornado warning issues just northeast Galena. We follow that storm, goes north of Joplin, then tornado, tried really close to tornadoing, baseball size cell. But there's one thing that storm did do that created, in my opinion, the entire event. And that was it put an outflow boundary from that storm, came down in the north side of the city of Joplin. Winds were deep out of the northeast. And as we came into downtown Joplin, the winds were out of the kind of north-northeast, about 35 to 40. And this conveyor belt of this deep, low-level wind shear, when went back to the storm, which now we've got a meso low in southeast Kansas. Remember, the speed max is approaching. Everything's coming together. So now we have a meso low forming in southeast Kansas. This second storm back southwest hyper exploded. It was on that boundary. And as soon as it started ingesting that deep northeast wind, the altitude was like almost 750 with 5,000 capes feeding it. The thing literally, I had my Baron equipment going, my Baron shear markers and radar, and I was monitoring both Springfield and Tulsa INX in Wichita. And immediately my alarm bells started going off as the hook formed. All my shear markers were through the roof. I went from 50 knots, 70 knots, 120. It was pegging the needle, and it says tornadoes imminent. About that time, we get over on Black Hat, on the west side of town. That's when I came across the police car, which is Officer Brewer, and he was a training cadet. And I remember pulling up beside him, and he said, "What's up?" And I remember we talked later, a couple of weeks after this event, and Officer Brewer told me when I rolled my window down, he saw my radar display with the big hook, and he could see the, the seriousness of it. He said the rotating circles. He said the next thing out of my mouth was that he said when I told him that a tornado was developing and a disaster was about to unfold, we got to get the sirens going. He said he knew at that instant that was the most important message of his entire career. And he turned to the guy he was training, which was his last day as a training cadet, the driver, and he said, something bad's about ready to happen. He called the dispatch. He said, "Chasers here. So tornado's coming down in southwest South City, get the sirens going." I leave him. I go back east on 20th. And as I'm going east on 20th, Kathy goes, "Oh my, it's a huge tornado. It's on the ground." I'll call 911 back again. And as I go south on Schuffendecker from 20th Street, I could see the tornado now is half-mile wide, growing rapidly, heading toward the hospital. And I tell beg the 911 operator, which the tapes are available, said, this is where I'm at. The tornado's on the ground. It's leveling. It's a huge tornado. You guys, sirens going. They fired them off, and the tornado sirens fired off. And we got down to around on south there, and I watched the tornado F5, F4, F5 at that time go across Schuffendecker, and I could see all the houses and buildings standing south of 20th Street. By the time I got to 20th and Schuffendecker, as the tornado passed, I saw a big inflow jet van on the backside, and every building, every house, everything that was standing 30 seconds before the tornado was 100% gone. And at that moment, I told Kathy, I said, it's an F5. And I said, and the track was rumbling, the wind, the steering wheel was vibrating. I couldn't hear anything. It was just a tremendous roar. Kathy's filming. We're going east, deep into the city, and heading over by the rail tracks, the Walgreens, and eventually the high school area over on Iowa Street, and just literally watched the tornado level the city.
Wow, just unbelievable experience, Jeff, and you bring it to life. Andy, go back, because Jeff said, that he talked to the dispatcher and the siren sounded there. But let's go back to the initial warning that that you sent. What time was that warning? That was at 5:09, right? So, and I think someone can correct me if I'm wrong. It may have been 5:10. But talk about Keith Stammer, the outstanding emergency manager there. Talk about his thinking during that process to what you can remember about sounding the sirens, because I know he sounded them in Joplin based on that first warning.
Yeah, I probably can't speak to all specifics of his decisions, but I will say, yes, he's an incredible emergency manager, an incredible partner of the Weather Service. And what I recall about Keith is I had 2 discussions with him before the tornado in Joplin, and those discussions are so vivid still. The first one, I think, was for the initial warning that covered mainly northern Joplin. And then I had talked with him when we issued the second. Again, I was trying to remember the exact time, 5:10 to 5:17, somewhere in there.
The second warning was issued at 5:17. That's okay. Right.
And so I remember, talking with him, and this just going to track into Joplin. Obviously, they're all aware. But I look back at that discussion, and you wish you had more to say at that point. And I think kind of alluding what Doug and Jeff's kind of alluded to, how things just came together so quickly. Because up until that time, this was a pretty kind of messy event. I mean, we had reports of funnels. We've had tornadoes and severe thunderstorm warnings out. Supercells, yes, but was it a classic event? No. There's a lot of cell mergers going on. I think Jeff alluded to that. We had some mergers and outflow boundaries that became a big player in this event on really a micro scale. They're in Joplin. Mm-hmm. And so, up until that time, as you are communicating through the warnings, and again, I'm so proud of the staff that I worked with that day, Weather Service Springfield, and the warning operator, who I don't know if many, I would say this, I'm not sure many would have issued the warning when he did, as soon as he did, because you did not have the classic setup yet at that point. It was still a pretty messy event. And so you issue the warning, you talk to Keith, and you just kind of go back and forth. What do you think? And we got a warning out, just plan for it. We're going to have a tornado. But at that point, there's no tornado yet. It has not yet touched the ground. I had talked to him. You don't have the Joplin tornado. And so there's no helicopters around, anything. There's nothing to tell him except just prepare. And there's a warning. So that's what he did in making his decisions. Remember, he had one warning already had hit a warning for northern part of the city, and now for the whole city, essentially at that point. And then that's and kind of connect the story here and where Jeff was going. Things really came together, right there as you come the west side of Joplin. Mm-hmm. And I remember we had in the Weather Service office there in Springfield, we had just really put up our situational awareness screens. That was kind of the thing now in the Weather Service, putting your situational awareness screens up with the TV, Weather Channel, and also your radar and data maps and so forth. And you're watching this unfold. We had the radar on one of our big screens and watching that unfold. And again, kind of a messy event. We had the warnings out. And then I remember so clearly that moment when the next scan came in, and you had then all of a sudden this huge classic hook with a huge debris ball right over Joplin.
Mhm.
And at that point, I just remember our hearts just sinking, because a quietness, a soberness just went over the office, because you knew at that moment what was happening. And then, and thinking then just a few minutes, minutes earlier, I'm not sure, it would have been 15, 20 minutes earlier when I talked to Keith, that wasn't there. The Joplin Tornado, that had not occurred yet. And now it was happening. And so those conversations come to my mind quite often, but more of so of, I wish I could have said more, but it simply wasn't at the time I had talked to him. And then after that, it just rapidly unfolded to become the disaster that it did.
So you issued the first warning at 5:09, the second one at 5:17. It says the tornado is radar indicated 15 miles west of Joplin, moving east. So, Jeff, Doug, find fault with that warning for me. I mean, I know Mike Smith has made a lot about warnings, misdirected people, but I mean, that sounds pretty reasonable to me.
Yeah, I read that, but we had warnings 3 times. I mean, well, the Joplin tornado was the 3rd warning, and they were developing over the same area. They were all developing on the west side of the metro, which is Galena, Kansas, right across the state line. They would kind of roll across the northern side of the city, never drop down, and then the storm would regenerate back to the west. And then it did it a second time, and it moved, and then that's what Jeff was talking about, the outflow boundaries. And then the 3rd time, it just came together. So those previous warnings, they're for the Joplin area, and it was the third big warning that really set that off. I don't know exactly when the sirens were going, at what time. I know Keith Stammer, he sounded them several times, but I don't know if there was really huge confusion. I think there's been a little bit more made of that than what there really was, because I think we all pretty much knew what was going on. I mean, it wasn't the same storm producing 3 different warnings. It was really, in a sense, 3 separate segments of the storm that was producing the warnings, if that makes sense.
So the story goes that Keith sounded the siren at 5:11 after the first warning, even though that warning only clipped a small portion of Joplin, and that he didn't sound it on the 5:17 warning because it had already been done. Has anyone ever talked to Keith about that? And I guess we may have on our show a long time ago. I should have gone back and listened to it, about whether he second guesses that decision in any way, or whether he thinks that was the right call at that point, or did it matter?
I can't speak for Keith, but I can tell you that's the policy up to that date. That was a policy of the county. They blew the sirens for the first warning, and as long as that warning was in effect, they did not reblow the sirens. So when the second warning, or when that warning came out for the city of Joplin, there was discussions internally at the EOC about whether to resound the sirens or not, or if that was going to confuse people, like it's an all clear, come out, and here comes the big one. I will tell you, from the thousands of emails and calls I've had days, weeks, and years after the Joplin tornado, from people that survived, people that had family members that perished, the first warning for the majority of the city, and they were at graduation, is when people looked outside, it was partly cloudy and the sun was out to a lot of Joplin. The sun was shining. People were like, there's a tornado warning? Wow. And they saw a big black cloud go north of the city. So a lot of people told me they went on with their business. They went to go eat dinner. They had family members in town, right? City grew, right? Normally it's not very high population, 25, 50,000 on weekend. It goes to 250,000 when you have all the people come in, right? For work Monday through Friday. So a lot of people were in the city that day. So, I can't second guess, but I can tell, and I'll give credit where credit's due. This is no new revelation, but I can tell you without a doubt, 100%, that Officer Brewer, taking what he saw on my radar screen, and everybody knows I talk fast. I mean, you try to convince an officer that a city is about ready to get leveled and you trust you, it takes a lot of convincing, right? And I had like 15, 20-second window to do that. Well, I was pretty damn convincing that something really bad was going to happen, and he trusted me. And him and his wife were killed in a motorcycle accident about 2 years ago, unfortunately. And Officer Burge called me a couple weeks after that event. And he told me, he says, Jeff, he goes, it's the most important call I've made in my career. Let's pick up that radio, trusting the people, because people, law enforcement and fire, they're generally not trained, for tornadoes and understanding the weather. And he trusted the information I provided to him. It was that, and you had a fireman and a police officer in the southwest side of the city said tornado is coming into the city on the southwest side. So it wasn't just my report; it was a combination of reports. They put it together again with the 911 call saying tornadoes in the city, domestic damage. They hit the siren again, and thank God they listened, because I can tell you, without a doubt, if the second siren hadn't been sounded, there would have been the death toll would have been much higher, no doubt about it. All the studies, the NOAA study, independent studies from insurance industry, the death toll would have been much, much, much higher if the second siren hadn't been sounded. Thank God that people trusted the information and the technology from the Weather Service, my message, the policeman's message, and the other people's reports in the city as the tornado was moving through the city and sounding the siren again, because it saved a lot of lives, no doubt about it.
So Andy, 529 in the excellent Kansas City Star story. I think it's the Star. Is that right? I should have Bruce Jones here to tell me. It just occurred to me that it was the Kansas City Star. I may be wrong about that, but in that excellent story, it says at 529 you talked to Keith about what was going on. What message did you convey to him at that time?
Sure, speaking to me, Bill. Is that correct?
Yeah. Sorry, Andy.
Yeah, just making sure. Yeah, and when I had talked to Bill, I had talked to Keith, and again, I don't know what the time it gave him the story there. The times I talked to him were before the storm had come into Joplin, and not during. And so that's where we're talking. There's this before we have the tornado on the ground coming to Joplin. So at that point, you're conveying, okay, you have the warning out. I remember some discussion, this is a separate warning. This is a different storm, that northern storm. And I think this gets to some of the complexity just about communication. You have to take what the meteorology gives you and what that event gives you. And the fingerprint of this event was pretty messy. And Doug alluded to we had a few warnings with different storms, and it just happened to be they were kind of crossing the same area there. And that complicates communication, obviously, and differentiating those storms. And I remember that really was what that conversation was about with Keith, is ensuring this is a different storm, is coming to the heart of Joplin. And at that point, we had the touchdown at that point.
So Doug, take us back to what was going on television and radio too, for that matter. What was going on in your station, the other stations at that point?
Well, first off, so on the sirens, this has been a huge debate over the past decade, especially after this tornado. The way we worked it in our area, or at least emergency managers, is every town or city got control on how they wanted to sound the sirens. And unfortunately, every town decided to do it differently. But I do know prior to the Joplin tornado, it was sound the sirens, and then there was an all clear siren. And they don't do that anymore. Now they sound them all the way through the event. So I know that was a lot of discussion over the past, decade, but yeah, coming up to that point, it was, shortly after 5, we're pretty much doing wall to wall, or I was doing very small segment breaks. In severe weather country, we always kind of laugh at stations that do wall to wall for severe weather, like severe thunderstorm warnings for small hail. We just don't do that. But we do wall to wall for tornadoes. And we were pretty much on most of the time. But once we got after about 5:30, I think it was 5:34, because I actually went back and looked at the coverage for the first time just a couple of weeks ago, and there were some stories ran. We were on, I remember, at 5:34. And then the next scan came in, and it was like 5:36, and you can actually hear my voice drop an octave, because it went from that northern cell and a southern one starting to merge, but nothing, and then to hook. And it was absolutely insane. So at that time, I had no information if it was on the ground or not, but the radar looked like it was on the ground. So we just stayed on, kept saying where it was at, where it was going, pushing into the west side of Joplin. And then we have a tower cam on the east side of Joplin, so we cranked it around to the west. And it took me about 60 to 90 seconds to even figure out what I was looking at, because it was just a black wall. And so I just thought it was a massive rain band working through. And I was saying on air, there's most likely a tornado to embedded in it. I had no idea that thing was the whole tornado. It was so massive. And then we started seeing debris pulling into this big shield, black shield. And at that point, you know, and it was on the west side of Joplin, probably about the hospital at that point. And that's when I knew that this was really, really bad. We hadn't gotten any information in yet of any damage, but you could just see the winds just ripping in. And then about 2 or 3 minutes after that, we lost our tower cam. Then that's when I really knew it was really, really bad. So, but we didn't get much information that there was damage until it was 2, 3, maybe 4 miles into the city. So that whole previous time, we were just banking off radar and what the radar looked like, and it didn't look good. And then it just broke loose from there.
So Andy, talk about that few minutes from the time you see that debris ball until you start getting reports. That's a terrible time.
It was. I remember that vividly because kind of a solemn quietness set over the office. We had seen the debris ball, much what Doug was talking about, and you know what's going on. And it was interesting, right? We're not hearing a lot, and undoubtedly, you know, the system is just overrun, and there's. So you know, you're just waiting for the inevitable. We don't know how bad. We don't know what it's going to look like exactly from a damage. You know, you're just hoping for the best at that point. So several minutes, and it was kind of an eerie time, as I recall. You just, you know, unusually quiet. You think, given what you're seeing on radar, and then you began to hear reports. The first one I hear, I think, was a roof off a nursing home. Maybe the first thing I remember hearing. And then you started, you know, hear more and more begin to come in, and you start to get some sense of the magnitude. But I think what really, what we saw, like I mentioned earlier, we just put our situational awareness screens up. One thing we had was Weather Channel, and somewhere along the line there, I don't remember how far out in that when they broke in, but they wrote, I think it was Mike Bettis that broke in there near the hospital with the scene behind him. It's really iconic. You just see the destruction. And you know, it's both a sense of awe and just incredible sadness. I mean, just your heart sinks. And so that, again, was just very vivid moments, and felt with the staff collectively as you see that, and helpless, obviously, that feeling and realize what's happened. And then you realize, you know, what's coming now is going to be the reports that you don't want to hear, but that you know are coming.
So Andy, going back, what would you do differently as the lead forecaster working this situation and your team? I'm sure you had this conversation in the office. What would have been different?
Right. You know, I don't know from what we had at our time, our disposal, what we were doing. I don't know. In fact, like I said before, I am proud of the staff, and especially the operators who issued those warnings when they did. You know, I personally, what I've said, you know, I wish I could have said more before the event occurred. That's an impossibility, obviously, but that's what you hope for after seeing it happen. You know, that was an incredible event, and all the right things mentioned already, all the right things or wrong things came together to make that event happen. And it happened over a populated area. That's where society and weather came to meet that day in a very real and devastating way. And, you know, when I go back, I wish I could have said, you're about to have an EF5 tornado, a mile-wide monster is going to come through. But there's nothing you could have said before that to say that. You could say there's a warning for a tornado that's likely going to occur. But again, that's not unusual for Southwest Missouri and Southeast Kansas. I mean, to have tornadoes. But this obviously was unusual. And how do you communicate and prepare for something of this magnitude? Impossible. But that's what I wish I could go back and somehow could have said. But everything at our disposal, you know, we did the best we could. I think we did communicating a tornado was coming, to be ready, to respond, to take action. It was there. We're talking with our partners like Doug and others, and Keith Stammer, who did an incredible job. Information was out. And certainly since then, though, we've begun to do more, you know, as far as ways we can communicate that hopefully will only enhance that. But again, you know, it's I've heard this kind of theme here and talking about this event. Every event has its own fingerprint. It has its own characteristics that sometimes they give it sometimes a long lead time to it and sometimes not. And this is one of those cases.
And So Andy, in the in the time after it, and all that, you say what you think about that. Did your office, do like some other weather service offices after big events and reach out for some care, because this had to be a very traumatic event?
It was, and I think that certainly was offered, as I recall, to the office, and there were a lot of discussions more than anything, I think, and even since then, there's sort of you come across the same group of peers. This is always a topic that's discussed, and counting the years, it certainly has been with the 10-year commemoration of this. And what we felt that day, which again, I mean, you think about all those that were so much more heavily involved, from first responders and those also directly impacted and those in that community. But as a meteorologist, the decisions you're making also, they're part of all of this, to help protect that community that you care for, really. And you're thinking about that as a meteorologist. And here's a case, there's nothing, you put the information out, but you can't stop this from happening. So yeah, those thoughts linger, and they do, I think, for me anyway, they certainly have, I think, crafted some things in the way I see weather in terms of how it interacts with our society and those partnerships, and the people we relate to, and how vital those are.
Let me say something here, guys. For those that happen to be critical of any of this process, let me say something. What Andy does, what Doug does, what Jeff does in the field, this is hard. It's really hard. Some people think that any buffoon can go down at the Weather Service and issue warnings, or get on television, stand in front of a green wall, or go out in the field. No, it doesn't work that way. So, goodness gracious, before you start being critical here, put yourself in their shoes, walk a mile in their shoes. You have no earthly idea what these three men experienced that day. I have some degree of knowledge, but I was not there. It's not my market. But having said that, I am curious. The one thing I hear over and over about Joplin is this debate about sirens, and when do they sound and when do they not sound. Tell me about, and Bruce Jones is on here, is weather radio penetration low there? Are people mainly depending on sirens? What's the weather radio penetration in that market back in 2011?
Well, back in 2011, if you lived on the west side of Joplin, you listened to one transmitter, and if you lived on the east side, you listened to a different transmitter. So it was kind of in the middle of two NOAA weather radio transmitters. Either one of them would give you a good signal, but the signal penetration wasn't what I would consider to be 100% robust. It was good enough to cause the radios to alert. But, James, people just get in the habit of listening for the sirens because that's kind of the easy thing to do. And going out and investing in a weather radio, that's just an extra effort and an extra expense. And I think, frankly, a lot of people, just by natural human behavior, put off on making these steps for preparedness.
And I'd like to bring in Kim. Kim, you're familiar with this situation. Just your thoughts from a social science perspective on the warning process that day.
It's nothing worse than an armchair quarterback coming in. I recognize that. And everything that all of you have said certainly resonates with me. I honestly, the Joplin event to me is just this horrible, conglomeration of all of the different factors that you've all discussed. And there was a lot of hand-wringing after the fact about changing, the way that we fundamentally do everything in the weather enterprise, to try to, rethinking everything from things like the sirens all the way through the warning process to try to address the Joplin situation. And I just don't think it's the kind of event that you can use to try to base national policy on. Sometimes the atmosphere does horrible, very difficult to predict things. And it takes a bit of humility on our part to recognize that. I think, there were some interesting questions that came up after the event. And I'm glad to have this crew assembled here because I'd like to dig a little bit more into some questions that I have. But before I say that, I want to point out one thing. Even with all the fatalities that occurred in Joplin that day, almost everyone who was actually in the path survived. I mean, the survival rate in Joplin was 98.5%. And that was an estimate, that was from an estimate of the number of people who were in the path given to me by Keith, the emergency manager for Jasper County. And that's a remarkable thing. And the people who did perish, what was learned after the event of the circumstances of their deaths, many of them were in their best available shelter. There's something we need to remember about a tornado that's going very slowly. So that's something that was another feature that hasn't been mentioned about this. People who were under this tornado, a mile wide, going, 10 miles an hour. I mean, that thing could be over you for several minutes with destructive EF5 winds. Even for a place like Joplin, where a preponderance of the housing stock was pretty well built homes. If you don't have a lot of basements, which there weren't a whole lot, it's up to sort of chance. And the fact that many people made it is a really remarkable thing that I think gets less coverage than it should. So I want to, say that first, that even with all the worst things that could possibly happen to there, it was a slight risk day. It wasn't the kind of day that you pump up a lot. You're all talking about this, even with the stuff we're developing at the lab, we're hoping that maybe you could say something like what the high end potential is, even if it's low probability. Maybe this was the kind of day where you could say it's not really likely you get a tornado, but if you do, it could be really awful. It's like the best thing you could possibly say about the Joplin day ahead of time. Speaking, Andy, to your questions about, well, maybe I could have hit this harder ahead of time. I mean, you have to contextualize it with the uncertainty. There's no way out of that. With all of that said, I did find it really interesting the warning practices surrounding that area just before the tornado happened. So the 3 years prior, there'd been a tornado in Mother's Day of 2008 that had hit Pitcher, Oklahoma, just over the border and into your CWA. And if you look at, and that'd been the last big tornado that hit Jasper County until Joplin happened. And if you look at the 3 years between Memorial Day tornado and the Joplin tornado, you see that the number of tornado warnings that county had was about 4 to 5 times that of the previous years. Now, some of this, I've always been curious, and Andy, now that you're here, maybe you can talk a little bit about what was going on behind the scenes in the forecast office. Part of it could have been that was the start of the polygon-based warning area. October 2007 is when polygons started. So, right after the polygon warnings instead of county-based warnings start is when we get this, shift after the Mother's Day tornado of 2008. That's when we get this shift in the tornado warnings experienced. But I know from what Keith said, another feature of what was going on in that county was he'd sound the sirens when there was a severe thunderstorm warning in a tornado watch. So when you're thinking about just the value of a siren, I mean, not only was there the tornado policy, but there was the severe thunderstorm policy that is your cue. If that's the only thing you've got, if it's Sunday afternoon, you're on Rangeline Road, it's after, high school graduation, that's all you've got is the siren. There are a lot of factors that made the siren maybe not the most potent of signals that day. But Andy, I'm curious to know, just for the piece of it that we can talk about with the warning policy, what was some of the behind the scenes that had been going on in that CWA in the years leading up to Joplin?
Yeah, I'm here trying to recollect those things, because to me, each event, its own thing, its own characteristics, and warnings are issued for that event. And at that point, I'm trying to get in the head of each warning operator for every event, which I cannot do. So, I don't, I guess, have the answer to why that number would be higher, except we were issuing more warnings because we obviously thought, and we had storms that were supportive of issuing a tornado warning for. That's really what I could say to that, because there's no change in policy that I'm aware of or anything like that. So I can't speak to. I have to go back. Were they more storms going through, or I don't know right offhand. So I'm probably not giving you a good answer there, except to say that I would say each and I kind of mentioned this earlier, I don't have a doubt that the warning operators, they were issuing warnings on storms they thought would produce tornadoes. And unfortunately, I guess in some ways, you had Joplin in the path of quite a few of those. So they had heard, the sirens quite a bit. They had issued, made the weather radio go off, those kinds of things. But again, is that just the character of the event and the character of the seasons? Hard to say.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting. I mean, the fact that you don't necessarily remember, I think, says something to me, because something that I think also goes underappreciated by our field is you can pinpoint if you just look at a map of forecast offices and things like their false alarm ratio, that doesn't tell the whole story. There are some places where it's much harder to forecast for because you get more complex setups like this one. I mean, this one was one of those that, like you mentioned, there were several tornado warnings that had been issued earlier in the day for things that didn't really materialize that could have. It was messy. And if you are in a place that gets messy convection, that's very conditional, it's very different than places where you get this supercell mode that's a lot more predictable. And can you comment on just that experience? What's it like forecasting for the Springfield, Missouri area, as opposed to some other places?
Right. I will say that really did resonate with me as you're talking about that, because, we'd kind of say in jest a lot, this year we have another lifetime event. There were so many big events seemingly in the Springfield area in Southwest Missouri, Southeast Kansas, whether it be flooding, ice storms, tornadoes. It was just all kinds of events. And many events were messy, meaning, these weren't the plains of Oklahoma where you can have a supercell and a tornado clearly seen miles away, and everyone's tracking it. A lot of events, they're rain wrapped, they're quick spin ups along, quasi linear systems, squall lines. They're hybrid events as far as storm morphography and characteristics. So that always presented a challenge, and usually had flash flooding going on top of everything else. So there were multifaceted events. So Springfield, Missouri, that office, and there's others like it, was a very busy office. So working severe weather was just a common thing, which again I alluded to earlier. Going this event, it's another event. We got to spin up for another event, and so there's nothing uncommon about that, because you work a lot of those in the Springfield office. And that's just, again, I guess speaks to the nature, though, of what you're dealing with from the communication standpoint and the challenges, because you have so many events. And so many events you have to try to give some meaning to that's different than maybe the previous one. Is it going to be worse? Is it not? How do you give a scale to that so many events that you deal with in that area, and giving that to the public and giving useful information to the media like Doug and emergency management to differentiate those events? And I think that's where I keep coming back to, sort of, the Joplin, how you even alluded to, Kim, that before that, it was messy up until Joplin. It was a kind of your classic messy event that we're accustomed to seeing in Southwest Missouri. And it's supercells are embedded, and you're trying to find the circulation and hoping to get a report on something. And then it just happened all of a sudden right there. So just the sheer number of events would I think certainly give the potential of getting just a lot of warnings in an area.
Kim, but I think I do think people were a little bit complacent. We had a monster decade. I mean, we had in 2000 in our DMA, we had a EF3 in 2000. We had 3 EF4, EF5s on May 4th of 2003. We had the EF4, EF5 on the 2008. And every time in between, we had derechos. I mean, we had everything. So I did hear that a lot, that people were just constantly heard the sirens going off. And so I do think there was a little complacency there, which is sad, because we from Joplin on the anniversary date, May 22nd of 2019, we had another EF3 that went through the north side of the city. Thankfully, didn't kill anybody that day. But, we went a gap of 8 years without an EF3 tornado. and people got complacent. And I think that is something that, which could be a whole different show. I do think people in severe weather areas, if they don't get warnings, often enough, or big storms often enough, they do get complacent.
Hey, Doug, if I can jump in here very quickly, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, did a tremendous report on Joplin. It's like 500 pages long, but it's great reading. And one of the facts they had was since 1950, only one EF2 tornado hit the Joplin city limits, and that was in 1971. But in that same period, 182 tornadoes of EF2 strength or greater were reported within an 80-mile radius of Joplin. And you know what happens is people begin to think that tornadoes go around them. If you only have one that hits here, but in the same period of time, 182 of them occur within an 80-mile radius of you, you begin to get this thing like you live in some kind of a protective bubble, and everything's going around you.
That's something that can happen. We found that here in Oklahoma, actually, which is, it's really interesting. I found that very affected Norman, where we have just, hundreds and hundreds of meteorologists that live here, but yet this pervasive belief that more, by virtue of being next to us, it attracts tornadoes away, even though many have hit Norman, even in recent years. There's a lot of factors that appear to take some tornadoes up into societal memory or not. So there's a lot going on. I feel like, a thread that ties between everything you guys are saying here is something that I really resonate with. And it's that what you really need to do for any of these events, even in the social science, when you said that there's a specific footprint meteorologically, I think there's also a specific footprint societally. The things that we learn, the ways that populations behave are probably dictated by a whole lot of their history and the kinds of impacts they've experienced recently, or in the distant past even, but that were really memorable. And I think to me, what this event taught me that kept with me was that we really need to have a weather service that is more able to sort of flexibly adapt to having very different kinds of populations that understand things very differently and respond to them very differently. And, next to the weather service, then this, whole communication ecosystem with emergency management broadcast that is taking things on in their unique way to serve their populations. And, Doug, you brought up the how there'd been a complex set of things that happened the years before. But when you reflect on it, I mean, even going into that day, you'd done years of reporting in that area. What did you think, going into that day? What were you preparing for? What were you saying to people, or did this feel to you like just another in a very long sequence of these junk kind of weather days?
I didn't think it would be a Joplin tornado. I mean, I just thought it was I hate to say it, I just thought it was another severe weather day that, maybe we have a tornado or something, and which is crazy because we've gone through so many in that area, but I did not expect that at all. And it hit me really hard. I had to do counseling for 5 years because I'm always attached to the Joplin tornado, and it's still hard. I mean, I went 10 years without going back and looking at the coverage. I just did it 3 weeks ago. I have a very hard time with it, but what it has taught me to do different is we get so many severe weather events. I almost kind of categorized them as little, moderate, big, and it's kind of reminded me to take even the little ones, or the ones I think are going to be little, and act like they are big ones. And but yeah, it greatly affected me. When I go back and look at it, sure, there's a lot of things I want to do better. I don't know if I could have done anything better. I'll think about it, I'm like, man, I wish I would have shown this, or I wish I would have shown that. But technology has come so far in the past 10 years. We have so many more tools, but it really hit me hard. I went down the next morning before the National Guard got there, and it just stood there and looked around, and it was devastating, and it absolutely awful.
Oh, I can hardly imagine. I'm sorry, Bill. I'm taking the reins here and asking questions.
No, that's
no, but
what we
you
love.
invited me.
You always have the perfect question, Kim.
Well, thank you. So Jeff, I'm interested, thinking about that too. Going into that area to chase can be its own kind of difficult decision. Like you mentioned, it's not necessarily the easiest terrain to be chasing in. In your experience of trying to chase in Southwest Missouri, is there something, that you look for to indicate this could be a day where it's actually worth going into this area? Was it just where, if there wasn't going to be anything that happened that day, that was just where it might set up? Because it was so conditional. I've always wondered, how did you even know to target that area? I mean, it's when you're relying on things like an outflow boundary to make the low level shear profile improve. I mean, that's a really interesting chase strategy.
Right. Well, I think there's a lot more to talk about than we have probably 5 shows to discuss. There's a lot of meteorology that happened that day. But I think you have to back up, like I said, 24 hours beforehand. We had tornadoes up on I-70 the day before. That air mass was in place. That cape was in place. The wave in Arizona is coming. 24 hours before the event, the models are giving us big red flags and saying, there's a possibility something bad's going to happen tomorrow. And knowing that back in my mind, I just filmed tornadoes, and here 18 hours later, the whole atmosphere is even more prime. 5,000-6,000 case. You got to draw a line in central Oklahoma, I-35. There's this left front quadrant with this jet coming in. You got doxulent jet axis. You got a mesolobe in southeast Kansas. And one of my fortes in meteorology, probably my best forte, never told this, is mesoscale meteorology. I think I'm about as good at it as anybody in history in the world. I'll give myself credentials. I understand mesoscale really, really well. And I understand it in real time. So as things happen, as if a storm blows up, it's approaching a warm front. I'm like, it hasn't been tornado for 2 hours, but guess what? The LCLs are really low. The next county north, it's going to start tornadoing like a machine. And you've got to understand that when you're out in the field. But on that day, as things at first they weren't very good. And with Tulsa and Pilts, and they run their local model, and you got the SPC, and they're giving real-time reports. Another thing I watch when I'm out in the field, I did it 10 years ago, and I do it today. And I did it just yesterday, 2 days ago, out chasing Panhandle. Is I look at the high-res model, look at all the cams, and I see which model matches the radar in satellite. The wind's back like they're supposed to. It's supposed to be out of the east-southeast right now, and they're southwest. Well, that model's wrong. It's not backing. So you got to think about this all the time. And on that Joplin day, I literally just looked at the meso page, and I saw where it was at. The storms didn't have that look. They didn't have that really bad mean look. Like, they're messy. They were messy. Winds were like southwest, but they weren't quite back enough. And I looked at the profile, and I saw the wind start as a wave approached. Winds in central eastern Oklahoma started backing to like 150, 160, and they started backing in southwest Kansas. And oh man, the shear profile was exploding in southwest Missouri. And I'm like 400, 500 listening. I'm like, okay, we're going to start fudging east. I started going east, and the more I went east, the better the atmosphere looked. And things came together really quick. So the answer to your question, normally, no, I do not go over to Missouri chase. It's extremely dangerous, especially south of I-44. I've been over there and helped the Springfield Weather Office on a number of occasions. It's dangerous over there chasing. It's a very high risk. The rain, the road, terrain, the weather. But north of Joplin, up to Kansas City, absolutely, no problem at all. I like good visibility, and it's safer. I think in this particular day, when you have this kind of dynamics coming out, and you look at history, and you look at pattern recognition, it's May. You just had this mega outbreak, 4 weeks before, in April 27th in Tuscaloosa. And the day before, I was down in Dallas chasing. So you look at this pattern, and you're like, you know what? We're coming out in the new year, right? 2011, just like this year, but this year is different. And you look at those pattern recognitions, you say, okay, it happened before 30 days ago. It's probably going to happen again. The atmosphere's prime, and I don't know if there's going to be an F5 today. I don't even know if there's going to be a tornado, but you get yourself in position. So if it does happen, you're able to witness it, right, and film it. But things came together extremely fast that day, and I think the key in the history will prove, and it already has, that the Joplin tornado, the intensity and the velocity of it, and the intensity of the tornado was so intense because of the first tornadic storm going north of the city, putting the boundary down, and it was lying perfectly in line with the city. And the second one came up like a big deer, and once it ingests that big deep inflow at High Cape, it went to work really quick. And so it was interesting. One thing about your social science, I'll share this with you, and I think this is critical. I've never told this story. It's a short story. For me, that's saying a lot. So about 2 weeks after the Christmas after the tornado, I had very older gentleman called me, and he's in his late 80s. And he called me on Christmas Eve. He said, here's his story. He was in World War II. He was at Pearl Harbor. And his wife had died like 10 years earlier. And he built his house, and it was on a wood floor foundation. And he had put a cubby hole in the master bedroom closet. That's what they did in the 40s. He'd had a fallout shelter. Okay. He built a house in the 40s, wood foundation, and hatched. They could get underneath the girders. So he said when the first tornado warning went out, he looked outside. The sun was out. He said he was in the living room. Did you see the bright sun? So he looked out when it said dark cloud passing west. He didn't pay attention to it. He said when the siren sounded the second time, around 5:29, 5:27 there, he just sat down his TV dinner, and the guy goes very slow and meticulous what he tells me happens. As he set his TV tray down on the wooden floor, and I built houses for a number of years and understand construction, he says his brand new big glass iced tea, he drinks a big glass iced tea at 5 o'clock every day. Okay. He set it on the tray table. And he said when the siren sounded, he didn't have to get up and look out the window because the tea was vibrating on the table like this. And he said he knew what was coming was as bad or worse than what he saw in Pearl Harbor. He didn't want to see the monster coming because he knew it was bad. He gets up, he runs to the bedroom, he opens the hatch, first time it's ever been opened in 50, 60 years plus. He crawls underneath the girders, and he was the street over from Iowa Street by the high school, which was in the middle of the F5. And when it was all said and done, most of his neighbors were killed, and he was the only survivor on the block. Okay. I have hundreds of stories of those that have never been told, hundreds of what people went through there. People don't have people have no idea how bad it was in Joplin. But anyway, that's one of thousands of stories from Joplin. So yeah, I think you got to get a way to communicate to the people in multiple forms, not just weather radio, not just this. It's got to be a lot of different ways, and new technology, top set boxes, weather radios, the new G3 way where we can communicate. We can pinpoint people communications on iPads and phones and turn things on with the new technology rolling out in the next couple of years. Satellite, there's going to be lots of ways we have to get communications to people. And all of it matters. It's not one, it's many. And after Joplin, I have multiple ways to communicate. So I have not bashful about telling you, I have Verizon, I have AT&T. This weekend, my Verizon didn't work when I was out in New Mexico, but guess what? My AT was rock solid because you know why? I had tornado warnings and I had to have the data or get messages out, Twitter messages, right? Or Facebook messages or any messages. You need triple redundancy. If you're emergency management, if you're along the coastline, if you're in Tornado Alley, I don't want to just rely on, no offense to Bruce, because I have a ton of his Bruce radios. The weather radios are awesome, and I highly recommend them. You need 4, 5, 6 backups, not 1, not 2, not 3. You need 4 or 5 backups when you're at your house, your business. If you run a hospital, Joplin broke every rule. Every emergency managers, it broke every rule of every business, every education, every hospital, every 911 backup, every police, every sheriff, every fire department in the United States. There is not a rule, there's not a book thick enough because it broke every rule in Joplin. There is not a book that you can pre-plan what happened in Joplin. You bring me to any city in America, and I will show you that your current plan will fail in the right condition, and I'll prove it. Because it did it, and I know how to make it happen. You bring out every phone communications. You bring out the 800 trucking. You destroy multiple fire stations. You destroy the hospital that's supposed to help save the people, and then you destroy. Half the people that live there are. Every block in Joplin was basically a morgue. Was a walking wounded by the thousands. I witnessed it. I saw it with my own eyes. Every single block in Joplin, hours after it, was walking wounded and dead people on every single block in that city. Until you face it and you see it in your own eyes, you don't understand the scope and the magnitude of what happened in that city. And we still don't have a good plan. I'm telling you, as a storm chaser, today, I'm telling you tonight, we still do not have the good plan in place in America for protecting and getting the word out to people during the warning process. It's still not good enough, in my opinion. We have a long ways to go. Joplin was a wake-up call. We're 11 years later, here 10 years later, and we still don't have a good plan. And that's the truth. And matter of fact, I'll even throw this down. I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but that's fine. I think we've taken a step backwards in the warning process in the last 10 years, not forward. I think we're worse off today than we were 10 years ago. That's going to shock the panel, but I stand by that. We're worse off today than we were 10 years ago for lots of reasons. Okay.
So, give us some of those reasons, Jeff, because I think that's an interesting conversation.
I think it's a number of things. I think you've got a lot of new vets coming in that need the experience to understand what's unfolding in front of them in real time to get ahead of it. I think there's a lot of people who are complacent, whether it be city emergency managers, whether it be weather service employees, new people on the block. I think that we've taken a step back. I see it all over the country. I see things that are falling in the gaps in the hole with warning process. It's not just in the plains. It's all over it's during the hurricanes. It's during all kinds of events, flash flood events, all kinds of events. And I think that we need to step up. We need to educate people. I think we need bigger emphasis on training. And situational awareness is critical. I think a lot of people don't understand situational awareness. Just because the storm hasn't been tornado in 3 counties west of you, if you got a better profile in your area, just because it hasn't tornadoed the next county, there's a high probability it's going to tornado in your county if you got the right conditions. And I think that situational awareness people don't understand. It's very frustrating today. I'll be honest with you. It's very disheartening. And Bruce Thomas asked me that question a week ago. Called me on Joplin Day when he was up in Joplin. He said, "What do you think about the warning process?" I said, honestly, I think it's not as good as today as it was. As a matter of fact, Washington Post wrote an article about it a week ago about that exact subject. I don't think it's as good as it was 11 years ago. And I think a lot of that times because we've got a lot of retirees, right, both on the weather service and the TV side, and you got a new crop of people in, and they don't have the experience that the retiring people have and deal with these big disasters, these big day events. And I think history will prove this to be a fact in the coming years.
Wow. And you mentioned that Washington Post article, and there are some things in there that make you think, because, if we have a false alarm problem, we've only improved it slightly since 2011, and in the process have lost some ground on POD also, which is what you don't want to do. But that's not universal. I mean,
right.
Different weather service offices. We've talked about Birmingham as a success story. We had the great guys last week talking about the TWIP. There's some good things there, but I think it's kind of a red herring that we've lost lead time. I think that's a difference in how warnings are issued. And Kim, you can speak to that. And maybe the others on the panel, maybe Andy, maybe you can jump in there too. If we have lost lead time, I think that it's, for that reason. Would you agree or disagree, Kim?
And my knowledge primarily comes from the paper Harold Brooks and Jimmy Correa published recently that details the changes in things like POD, FAR, and lead time, especially in the era since 2012, the year after all of these historic tornadoes. And what they found was, they don't know exactly what is behind the why. There's a couple of possibilities. One thing they did find was that average lead times do appear to decrease. At the same time, the default setting in AWIPS for issuing a warning changed from 45 minutes to 30. And if there's anything we know in the social sciences, and can say there are all these things called nudge units around the world that are designed to try to help people make different kinds of decisions, even if unconsciously you try to help people make the right kinds of decisions. They're called nudges. The best thing you can do is set a default in the direction of the decision you want people to make. And so defaults are quite important. And apparently this default was something that went beyond even the notice of programmers and most of Weather Service headquarters. So it really is something that was going on in the background while there were other big programmatic changes that everyone was striving for. And from a social scientific perspective on at least the behavioral piece where there were forecasters, it appears that what Harold and Jimmy mapped was there was this sort of trade-off between false alarm ratio and POD that started in kind of central and southern regions where those tornadoes had happened, and then spread geographically in the rest of the Weather Service. And if you look at that from sort of a political science, organizational communication perspective, it shows a national weather service filled with people who wanted to try to do something better And they were capable of almost instantaneous policy change, whether it was in a formal edict or not. The fact that you have a weather service filled with people who will glom onto an idea and say, hey, you know what might help if we try to reduce false alarms, and then did what they felt was necessary to do it. I mean, if that's what that is really saying happened, that's an extraordinary thing. We have a very powerful, I mean, where can you point anywhere else in the federal government and say, we have a bureaucracy that can change everything it does in 1 year to be more responsive to what it thinks the people need? I mean, I challenge you to find an example. So there's a lot of hay that can be made, I think, of the changes that took place, that at least the measured changes that took place since 2012. I take a generally very positive view on it because, frankly, from the social science perspective, we don't have an answer for you on what's a perfect false alarm ratio or POD. I mean, there are asymmetric penalties. You get penalized more for missing something, and there's a debatable whether the false alarm ratio really affects, behavior is debatable. It's maybe highly conditional. Maybe in a case like Joplin, where something very extreme had happened in that one county, yeah, maybe that's actually kind of important if sirens are the thing that you have access to, and sirens haven't been a very high fidelity source lately. Maybe there's something there. But otherwise, looking nationally, it's the social science is very unclear at best. So I think what I point to that makes me feel quite good about what happened was just that we have an organization filled with people that want to help. That's what I see out of all of that. And I think the debate is going to rage on as we continue to try to research this topic more. Just remember, the social science in this area is even in its early stages. So bear with us while, I think we should just all try to have a little bit of patience with one another while we all learn how to do this and try to do things better. So sorry, I'll hand it to the panel for any thoughts they have on any of those pieces, and just generally reflecting on the last 10 years. Jeff, you definitely I think your views are shared, that that people can have a lot of feelings about what's gone on in the last 10 years. Mike certainly expressed some feelings there. A lot of the things he said weren't incorrect. I think there are just multiple ways to feel about them, about the facts.
Yeah, and social science is going to play a critical role going forward, no doubt about it. Troy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Jeff, and everybody knows where I'm going to drive this cart, but and I say this with all respect to Andy and his colleagues, the men and women of the National Weather Service, which do an amazing job. Folks, just look at the fact. Andy, how many people we have that are being paid by the National Weather Service? 4,000 across the country or something like that. I mean, I'm not far off. And we're one of the few federal agencies, the National Weather Service, that's responsible for issuing warnings for public safety and for property and this sort of thing, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So you have to give the men and women of the Weather Service a lot of kudos. But I would ask you this, Jeff, because I respect a lot, you and I've talked a lot in the past. Would you be willing to say that there are too many warnings these days?
I think it depends on which office you work at, what state you live in.
Okay.
We all know that, right? That's the big elephant in the weather enterprise, right? That's something that we know and all talk about. So certain offices have very good, without naming offices because they know who they are. They're very tight ships. They're very well run. Offices are a little bit loosey-goosey in the warning process. And I think everybody in the weather enterprise knows that. And at the Met, and how I say this, there's not a good political way to say this. If you got a Met that's not real astute to severe weather, and they're in a WFO office that's also weak, that's a deadly combination. Okay, you're not gonna hear anybody else say that, right? I'm gonna pull the cat right out of the bag. If you've got weak Mets at TV stations and weak WFO in that same area, you've got it, and it's in Tornado Alley, you've got a problem, folks. You got a big problem, and I see it every day all over the Tornado Alley. Let's just pull the cat out of the bag and just go right there, because that is a problem in 2021, and we all know it, but nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to solve it, and nobody wants to deal with it, and that's the problem we've got as a weather enterprise. We need to address.
Well, Jeff,
How do you fix it? How do you fix it?
But no,
I don't know.
This is what you do. I mean, I think you have to go back to what Bill was pointing out. We have the offices in Birmingham and in Dodge City that are sitting back holding workshops that are talking to their employees about how are ways we can critically look at how we're issuing warnings and making sure we're doing the best job. And I got to say, the Weather Service, I think that's a great idea. Now, I agree with you, Jeff. It's not necessarily something applied across the board. This is why Mike Smith and I are good friends. I in his article, which I'll plug in a few minutes, in the Capital Weather Gang, I would love to see something like the NTSB that would look at the warning process independently. I love the Weather Service, Andy, and the service assessments, because I think the Weather Service, in many ways, go back sometime. You want a real interesting time, go back and look at the service assessments from the Weather Service off their webpage. It's amazing. Go back and look at the Dallas tornado of 1957 and look at that report. So the Weather Service is on top of it, but I think we need more external reviewers as part of the service assessment process. I don't have any problem with the Weather Service being part of it, but I think we ought to have more of an independent group to look at it, and I think that would help. I think some of our offices are doing a hell of a job as well, looking at how they can more critically issue those warnings for areas. But, you know, Jeff, one thing that's real interesting is what Daryl has done up at Iowa State in the CAL, because you can go through and look at warnings, and you can see those CWAs and WFOs. And how many warnings are being issued and that sort of thing. And Daryl's really done a pretty amazing job with that.
Yep. Like I said, we're all in this together, and it's all up to us to find better ways to help save people, right?
Yep.
So we don't have it. If we have another Joplin type disaster, it will occur again. Just what city and when? Is that we have better communications for the people. And I don't have all the answers, okay? And I'm not throwing rocks at anybody or any particular group. I just say we've got a problem. And I think as a weather enterprise, we need to address it and look at it and see how can we do better. And I think we need a lot more people on board, right? Mm-hmm. And the social science is a big part of that. And I think that's what we need to address.
Yep. Hey, before we go to the recorded segments real quick, Doug briefly touched on this. I want to talk about the mental health aspect of this. And this is kind of for Andy and Jeff, since Doug talked about it. Mm-hmm. Andy, talk about the Weather Service. Did you call in counselors or professionals for folks to talk to after this?
Yeah, I think we alluded to earlier, we did have that access to that, yes. But I think since then, there's been a more concerted effort. And I know some research into critical stress that follows these kinds of events because, you know, it really is sort of, you've heard the Weather Service always probably described as like a trauma center when you have a severe weather event going on. And so there certainly are more discussion about that openly, I think, after these events and what some go through, some maybe conscious or subconsciously. Because again, you know, I know we're talking about numbers and stats and all those things are so important as we try to learn to get better. And that's all what we all want, working together to do that. But we also have very real people trying to make the best decision possible with everything at their disposal to do it. And that's an incredible stress, especially if you have events which really are everyone's control. You put information out there and you hope for the best actions, you hope for the best communication and response. But when you, as a Weather Service employee, you have an incident, a disaster like this on your shift, that's always with you. You always think about what could you do differently? What should you have done? And I mean, there's really no answer to that because disasters happen. So there's that aspect. You have real people issuing warnings and nowhere affecting real people making decisions on their end as they receive that information. It's a complex issue, as we all know. But yes, from a Weather Service employee standpoint, these can have effects. Certainly, and they do because the conversations happen about how I think Doug mentioned earlier about just first watching some footage. I know for me, every time the documentary would come on, or and you see a piece on Weather Channel about it, I would tend to my heart rate would go up. I would tend to just turn it off because it just brings that event to the reality of what it was, and you don't want to revisit that very often.
And Jeff, for the
Andy?
chasers, you had to. I can't fathom what you experienced. How do you deal with it?
You know, 40 years, 45 years of chasing before Joplin, it only prepares you. And I've been on a number of big disasters, May 3rd, 99. I mean, I've been on a lot of disasters where it took a human toll on a lot of people. When you're in that mode, and especially if you're going out to help people after disaster, and you know there's going to be probably fatalities and extreme injuries, you have to put yourself in a different mode. You basically have to disengage your feelings, and you have to deal with the critical. I mean, when I yelled out in that ditch on Iowa Street, does anybody need help? And it sounded like 1,000 cries from every direction. You go to the first people you can help, you help those people. And unfortunately, the first people walked up on, I couldn't help because they're already gone. You go to the house next door and you dig those people out, and you go to the next house. So you have to turn off the human side and deal with reality. It's like, okay, here's another fact during that rescue in the F5, which probably most people have never thought about this, but it's kind of interesting. During the F5, right in the core on Iowa Street, the people that were in their houses, and there were many, they were on the right side, dead center of the tornado, and I mean literally, I'm talking like a house apart. The house, the debris, and the people in them would get shoved to the right, the forward flank, right side of the tornado, would get shoved across the street or in the front yard. The house next door and the house and the people inside it would get shoved back to the west. So on one same street, I found people in the front yard, but yet on just the house next door, they were blown back to the west. So I'd find people back to the west of the house in the rubble, but on the same street, they would be on the east side, depending on which side of the F5 you're on. Forward flank push, this side's back, right? To the northeast, back southwest. So you have to mentally think about this when you go and look for people. And that's what happened tonight at Joplin. But you have to turn off the human side, and you have to think mentally, who can I save? Who can I dig out of the rubble? Who is savable? Because there are some people that I couldn't help, right? And if I want to do things over, I wish I could have saved every person I came in contact with that night, right? And I couldn't. And I understood that. I saved the people I knew I could absolutely save. And you do the best you can in those situations. And it was overwhelming. I mean, it was overwhelming for everybody that was there. I mean, you could have had 1,000 firemen and 1,000 ambulances, and you probably still wouldn't have had enough people. I mean, it was just overwhelming. That's the facts.
Hey, Andy, I got a question for you, and Weather Service Headquarters Suite will shake at this one because I always ask this question. And I'm just kind of wondering, that asterisk number 3 of warnings that comes out now, the time reference and the threat and where it is. I pulled up the latest warning from Midland, Odessa tonight, and that third asterisk reads at 9:16, a severe thunderstorm located 9 miles southeast of Andrews, moving south at 20. Eddie, is there still, when we changed the version of WarnGen a while back, I think Central and Southern Region had started putting in something saying National Weather Service meteorologist detect a severe thunderstorm located 9 miles southeast of Andrews, moving south at 20. And I've always said, and I've told Louis this over lunch, why doesn't this warning, as far as messaging is concerned, give credit to the men and women who issue the warning? Radar has never issued a warning in its life. It does not do it. The people do it. And the Weather Service doesn't even give credit to the Weather Service people. And it's going to crawl on the bottom of Doug's screen on TV. That line, asterisk line 3, is always going to crawl there. Let's give credit to the men and women of the Weather Service and return that line to WarnGen. I'm just wondering, has there been any, from what you hear, Andy, any request to try to get that put back in WarnGen?
I'm really not aware of that. That's a nice sentiment. I appreciate the sentiment of that. But as far as, any form of discussion, I don't know of any. But I would also say that from a weather employee standpoint, most are not looking to have their name out, not because they're afraid of that, but because they see themselves as a team.
But Andy, on that other hand, if I'm sitting here, Kim, it's all about messaging. We're talking about messaging, how you message. And I get so I got so damn, at least we don't say Doppler weather radar. I don't care what Doppler weather radar says. I want to know what the forecaster says. And I think that if it said National Weather Service meteorologist detect a severe thunderstorm 9 miles southeast of Andrews, I think it could potentially get a better response because they know a professional is issuing that warning. And don't assume that people know that all the time.
And I'll chase a rabbit. I'll say this: when I'm on the air, I typically know who's working at warning desk, and I'll mention them by name.
Yeah.
I mean, we are all a team,
Yeah.
and they don't mind, and they don't necessarily want that, but they don't mind it. And I think it's good for people to know because what they do is hard. Again, I challenge anybody to go into this test bed and you get in that hot seat, and let's see how you do. It's hard, but we have to take a quick break here because we're running. We could go a long time here, but we're going to take a very quick break. We're going to pause for Tony Rice and his astronomy report. We've got Jen with This Week in Tornado History. We're going to come back with our picks of the week and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along. Let's start with Tony.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
Next Thursday, June 10th at sunrise, a partial eclipse will be visible for the northeastern third of the continental U.S. Everybody north and east of the line extending from about the Montana and North Dakota Canadian border down to Savannah, Georgia, will see something. The further north and east you are of that line, the more of the sun you'll see covered by the moon. Augusta, Georgia, for example, will barely notice anything with about 3% of the sun obscured. Washington, D.C. will see about 63%, Northern Maine about 77%. Even the spot of greatest eclipse on an island between Greenland and Canada, less than 90% of the sun will be covered by the moon. It's because this isn't a total eclipse. This is an annular one. Not annular as in yearly, but annular as in annulus, Greek for ring, referring to that ring of fire that's seen around the moon as it passes in front of the sun. 2017's total eclipse was total because the moon completely covered the sun. This happened because the eclipse occurred just days after the moon was at its closest point to the Earth, or perigee, making it appear just a little bit bigger in the sky. Next week's new moon occurs just days after apogee, or the furthest point in the moon's orbit from the Earth, making it appear about 2 arc minutes smaller and leaving that ring of fire. After that, the next solar eclipse visible from the US will sweep across the southwestern states on October 14th of 2023. That one happens near apogee as well, so it will be annular. The next one that a lot of folks have circled on their calendars, as it will move up through Texas, across Ohio, across the Great Lakes before exiting out over the Canadian Maritimes, will be on April 8th, 2024. Now that one happens near perigee, so it will be total. Now, it may seem like solar eclipses are a rare thing, but they really aren't. Somewhere on Earth, about every 18 months, a total solar eclipse will be visible. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, only a few weeks after the Joplin tornado, a very strong long-track twister made its way across parts of Massachusetts on June 1st, 2011. The path length was just shy of 38 miles, and the maximum width estimated at a half mile, peak wind speed at 160 miles per hour. The tornado developed in the Munger Hill section of Westfield, damaged primarily to trees. Many were uprooted or snapped, and the roof of the elementary school was also damaged. It intensified in West Springfield. Several buildings lost their roofs and a few structures collapsed. The tornado then crossed the Connecticut River adjacent to the Memorial Avenue Bridge and into the city of Springfield. Here, the tornado produced extensive damage on the south side of the downtown area where many homes were destroyed. The tornado also produced severe structural damage to townhomes and apartments near Springfield College. In the Island Pond section of Springfield, Cathedral High School and St. Michael's Academy sustained significant damage. The tornado also moved directly through the town of Monson. Several homes and the high school were destroyed. There's a total of 3 fatalities. A 39-year-old woman in West Springfield was killed when her house collapsed on her while she sheltered her 15-year-old daughter in the bathtub. A 23-year-old man was killed when his van was crushed by a falling tree, and a 52-year-old woman in Brimfield was killed when the trailer home she was living in was thrown 35 feet into the air. It was estimated that 1,400 houses and at least 78 businesses were either damaged or destroyed. 200 residential buildings were condemned, and more than 300 rental units were lost throughout western Massachusetts. Nearly 10,000 acres of woodlands were destroyed. In Springfield alone, 7,500 mature trees were uprooted or destroyed. We have a detailed summary about this event at tornadotalk.com. Calling all weather enthusiasts. Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band at amsweatherband.org. As an AMS Weatherband member, you'll get to go behind the scenes with the scientists of the American Meteorological Society, whose members have been at the forefront of weather, water, and climate research for over 100 years. You'll learn about the very latest research from the scientists who are actually doing it. What's more, you'll become a part of a passionate online community of weather enthusiasts. Get access to exclusive videos, webinars, and other fun content, and support the science you love. Learn more and join the band today at amsweatherband.org.
So before I pitch to Bill and Bruce, I had to mention this. I guess you guys saw that Roy Leap passed away. For those that don't know, Roy was the legend in the Tampa market for years and years. Roy came into existence in the television world in the decade of the 1950s, and he was a great, great weather warrior. And my pick of the week, it's going to be the actual show itself, WeatherBrains 91, because Roy was on that show. This was way back in 2007. But I wanted to play a little clip, just a little snippet. And again, it was just an amazing hearing that show. Listen to the whole thing today, because we had, of course, JB back then and Brian Peters on the show. But anyway, here's a quick snippet of WeatherBrains 91 that aired originally back in 2007.
What type of maps did you use back then?
We had a big square drum. It was covered with kind of a red plastic covering that had the maps drawn, the outlines of the maps drawn on them. Of course, this is black and white television, so it didn't make any difference what color it was. And we used poster paint in a little homemade squeeze bottle.
And that's Roy talking about how they did television weather back in the 1950s when he started. Just a fascinating interview. So again, that'll be my pick of the week. It's WeatherBrains 91 from October of 07. But Bill, you and Bruce take it away.
Yeah, thank you, James. And we want to say thanks to the AMS too, because they're coming to the end of their 3-month sponsorship of the show here. We appreciate them and what they're doing with the Weather Band. If you haven't already joined, lots of great benefits. Take advantage of that. We thank the folks at the AMS. We also thank the folks at Midland for their sponsorship of the show, and it allows us each week to get together with Bruce Jones. Bruce, we're talking about a terrible event tonight in our history that, NOAA Weather Radio is still the backbone. And, when I was, cautioning my hotels in Louisiana today that they were in a marginal risk, one of the steps is to make sure that weather radio is turned on and ready to alert.
Yeah, and if you watch WeatherBrains or listen to WeatherBrains, I would really appreciate it if you would help get the word out about the NOAA Weather Radio Network. I think we assume that because we've mentioned it a few times, people are going to remember it, but people don't remember it. They forget about it. Selden, Kansas got hit by a tornado just last week, and one of the newspaper stories mentioned that the police and firefighters were driving around the city of Selden with their sirens on to warn people of the tornado. There's a NOAA Weather Radio transmitter the next county over that saturates Sheridan County with NOAA Weather Radio signal. People, don't put your police and firefighters in danger doing a job that's already done automatically by these little weather radios. We have a system that does this for us. We don't need our police and firefighters to endanger their lives. And one of them, a power line fell on top of his truck. He could have been killed. We don't need that. Just get a weather radio. These things are like $30 or $35. The system's automatic. It's run by the federal government. It works real well. Why are we not doing this? I don't get it. And I pull my hair out year after year. For 40 plus years, I've been telling people, this is an absolute no-brainer. The system is there. It's run by the federal government. It's your National Weather Service directly talking to you inside your own home immediately. The second they issue the tornado warning, we don't need to put our police and firefighters in danger, having them drive around in the oncoming tornado to warn people, because they can get it automatically. So please, if you're a fan of this program, for corn's sake, help us get the word out that this system is there, it works well, and it is America's official federal warning system paid for by your federal tax dollars. If you go to midlandusa.com and use the promo code SPAN25, that's SPANN25, use that promo code and you can get 25% off of all of the weather products and accessories. We've got Father's Day coming up. For corn's sake, these make the perfect Father's Day present. If your dad, your granddad, your uncle, if your son-in-law does not own a weather radio, please, for the love of all that's sacred, get them a weather radio, because these things work. As Jeff Piotrowski said, we need to have multiple redundant ways of getting these warnings, and we do not need to be putting our police and firefighters and emergency managers in harm's way, expecting them to drive around in an oncoming tornado with their sirens on, giving out a weather warning that people can easily get automatically 24 hours a day on a NOAA weather radio.
And Jeff, go ahead.
I'm going to say one thing. He hit the nail on the head. There was police and fire, and the sheriff was in the town of Sheldon while I was filming the town of Sheldon getting hit by the tornado. One other thing about the Sheridan County Sheriff's Office that he'd be committed on, two of the sheriffs stopped at two 18-wheelers on the east side of town, got the truck drivers out of the 18-wheelers as the tornado was approaching 100 yards away, and rescued both 18-wheeler drivers and got them out of harm's way as the tornado went over the 18-wheelers. I witnessed it, and Bruce is absolutely correct. You got to get weather radio, multiple backups. It's the only safe way to do. Every school, every hospital, every business, every hotel should have weather radio. Everybody should have weather radio.
Thanks,
Preach
Jeff.
on, Brother Piotrowski.
Well, it's a fact. I mean, weather radio saves lives.
And that's what our job is to be the ambassadors of that. So thank you for sharing that, Jeff, and thank you, Bruce, for being here. I know we've really examined the tornado in Joplin from a lot of different angles tonight. Aubrey, do you have time for email, or are you past time for email?
I've got about 45 seconds I can spare, and that's about it. So
Anything you want to say? Throw a pick in there, maybe?
We can save it for next week. But yes, let me go through my pick real quick, because this is courtesy of Brad Panovich. Saw him post a Facebook video earlier today. It's a great website. You can basically click a location on the US map and follow, if it were a raindrop, where would it go, and follow the streams and creeks and reservoirs and all this stuff out to the ocean, and really kind of a testament to the hydraulic cycle. And what a fantastic resource that you didn't even know you needed. That's quite amazing. So that's my pick.
It really is a cool pick, and it was going to be my pick of the week, but Aubrey, I'll take the Foghorn.
I looked in the email. I didn't see anyone.
I should have publicized better. Thank you, Aubrey, for
all right, you guys have a great night.
Really is a cool too. But we were saying, we've examined the tornado from a lot of different angles tonight, but there's some ways things would be different today. Andy, when you think about it, and Doug and Jeff, we've got some new tools, that are going to help this go round. We've got different scanning patterns for the radars. That's obviously, maybe not a direct legacy of the tornado there in Joplin, but certainly, maybe got accelerated by that process. Also, you think about, having dual pole now, tremendous tool, and it's an amazing thing. What are some of the other legacies of Joplin? Doug, can anything come to mind for you that maybe it's going to be a little easier 10 years later to deal with the Joplin type event?
I really think it's the communication now, but kind of going back to what Bruce said, is that the younger generation, they don't know much about NOAA weather radios. So Bruce, do give me a call. We're going to team up here again. So, and then, but yeah, I really think communication, but there is a huge lag of people under 40 who just don't watch TV, and they expect to get it on Facebook, or they expect to get it on Instagram, when that's not our job. So I think that's a huge problem in the next few years.
Andy, anything you want to add to that?
Communication, certainly, as Doug just mentioned, and how we better communicate a given event, a weather event. And I think part of that communication is partnerships. something that really came out to me during that event and after the event, relationships you have within your community, with your media partners, with your emergency management, with your core partners. And I really think the strength of those that you have beforehand really dictate how well an event goes and afterwards. You can't stop a disaster, but those partnerships and those relationships can really get you through them and only enhance and better the communication during those events. And I think from a legacy standpoint, the Weather Service from that, really built the Weather Ready Nation initiative, and part really to build on those partnerships. And we went into, obviously, the Weather Service has always done decision support services, but a more intent initiative in that and defining that, and how can we better, communicate and come alongside our core partners in emergency management in preparing for these events when they do happen. So hopefully we're better communicating. Things like impact-based warnings, the idea of idea of communication. How can we get the actual impacts into the warning process as we know them? So those are a couple of things. But again, it always comes back to me as I think about those relationships are so important that we have here as a community, and as we build together as a Weather Ready Nation is really what we're shooting for.
And Jeff, anything you want to add that's coming in the old trick bag that's going to help us as we go forward in the future?
I think it's higher res models, pattern recognition. I think the dual pole, we're still in the early days of a lot of new technology related to dual pole and other technologies that will be groundbreaking in the years to come, that will be very site specific in the warning process. And I think between the private and the government sector working together, we'll bring that to fruition in the coming years. I think it's going to get better, way better. I think our best days are ahead of us. I'm very excited, not just in the private sector, but also in the government sector. Our best days are ahead of us. The most exciting times are yet to be discovered.
Outstanding. Well, I know we're getting close to 10 o'clock here. I'll quickly go around and ask for picks of the week. I'll start with our very own Jen Nairmore. Jen, what you got for us this week?
Hey there. I'm highlighting one of our new summaries. It's actually a free one that we were putting out on the Sawyerville event. We are still working tirelessly on our super outbreak project. And so we are highlighting Sawyerville, which was an overshadowed event from the 2011 outbreak, but we were able to find some stories and kind of delve into the damage. And then we have a premium summary that'll be coming out tomorrow. That's on Bridgeport, which was another event that was overshadowed as well. And so we're highlighting that too. We're really doing our best here to try to get some of this information out. And then we're going to spend 2 weeks researching and writing Tuscaloosa. So that's our tornado top goals here. But please, everyone, go out and read Sawyerville. We're really proud of it. It was our three-headed author, is what I call this, is with me and Nick and Nelson writing together to put this together. We hope you enjoy that story.
Jen and the Chipmunks, working hard for you. And Rob Strecker has done an amazing thing. He has gone back and cataloged every one of Professor Peters' Weather 101s that he did over many, many years. And so Scott Martin will be taking that information and putting it together. There's some fantastic topics in there. And on a related note, Jen, who of course is our social media expert here on the show, not that we don't have lots of social media experts, but she's the designated social media expert, and she's going to be communicating a lot of that information in between shows, because there's just a wealth of information over 800 shows of WeatherBrains. Just having the honor of speaking to Roy Leap, that's just amazing that we got to do that. Tonight we've had 3 outstanding WeatherBrains with us. Troy, I'll go to you for a pick of the week. What you got?
Yeah, just going to go in there and give a plug just for people to read Mike Smith's column, Capital Weather Gang, 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, I guess, just talking about the sort of the atmospheric NTSB, to go back and look at events and maybe get some external partners more involved in that. However you think about that, it's, I believe, worth a read.
Outstanding. And Kim, you like that NTSB analog potentially, right?
Yeah, and there's been some discussion for a number of years, and especially the social sciences and policy side of our field, because you guys have brought up the NIST report, for example. Just from a pragmatic standpoint, all these different federal agencies go in after disasters and do their own study on some piece of what happened. There can be a Department of Transportation thing. There can be a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers thing if it's a flood event, Weather Service, NIST. And there's not a lot of sharing that goes on about what lessons are learned. And the thing about disasters is that they're layered. We are not, the National Weather Service, while we have a mission to try to help save lives and protect property, we only play a small, not a small, it's insignificant, but we only play a role in that, right? There's a lot of other infrastructure that we're interacting with, our forecasts, warnings, messages, and communication interact with that, you know, underneath that needs to change, you know, for our messaging to be more effective. We'd have a society that's more resilient, you know, in so many other ways. And if we had an NTSB for disasters, they could give a systematic treatment to those multiple layered issues like we do with NTSB. They look at things like human factors of, you know, piloting aircraft, not just that last step of, you know, whatever turbulence you hit. Well, aircraft don't as much as turbulence is scary, don't want to scare anybody here, turbulence doesn't kill people. But whatever, like it's not these little, like that little teeny bit that was probably visible. It's that there was this whole system of things that led to some catastrophic failure, and they pinpoint that and they deal with it through education and training of workforce, through management of personnel, through the entire checks and balances process of the machinery. And we could do something really similar and raise to a higher profile the issues that are probably underneath a lot of our problems that are less sexy, but really are the issue. You know, the thing that gets the high profile is the National Weather Service issuing the warning or not. The thing that's actually determining our success and failure is just a lot more complicated and pernicious. So I love that idea. And I think that it's well past its time that we try to give disasters the kind of treatment they deserve, the natural disasters, as much as aviation disasters and transportation disasters. With
so
that,
Kim, pick of the week?
My quick pick of the week is a study that was done just detailing some of the circumstances of fatalities in Joplin. And while you can look at any statistic in multiple ways, the study really focuses on, you know, fatality rates in different kinds of circumstances, especially the EF4, EF5 damage areas where most fatalities occurred. I really do encourage you to read that with an eye to survivability. Even in the worst damage, which is a very small part of the tornado, that's where only something like 3% of the people exposed to that died, which is, in my mind, also just a really remarkable thing to think about. A lot of people lived through this event, and a lot of heroic stories of survival that, Jeff, it sounds like you've heard many of them. I think we have to be crediting the populations, you know, our citizens for their awareness, for their ability to do things for themselves and their families that saved their lives. The report highlights how children really didn't suffer, you know, the consequences as much as other populations, as much as you'd expect, and probably because parents were saving children and things like that. I think there's a lot of heroism in this story that, you know, was worth being told.
Yeah, the stories are always amazing. Doug, I know you got to get out the door. We've kept you way too long. You need to go make some memories with that beautiful boy. Do you have a pick of the week or anything you want to share with us?
Yeah, I'll go with that. I'll go my son's Facebook page. He's 12, so he likes attention and preteens. Yeah, it's called Christian's Journey. And he's happy. He's got, you know, 20 some odd thousand, 25,000 followers on there, but he'll put updates and then TikTok and all that stuff. But yeah, so I'm going to go with that. And you guys can always see where we're at in the process as well. And but thank you very much. It was a great time tonight. A great discussion.
Well, we will be following that very closely, and all of our love, thoughts, and prayers to you and your family as you continue on Christian's journey. And we appreciate you being here tonight. All right, Bruce Jones, I'll hit you real quick.
Well, I would,
and you need to go, Doug. Go ahead and go.
Yeah,
you go do what you need to do.
That NIST report, National Institute of Standards and Technology report, 500 pages or something like that. Too long to download, but fascinating analysis of where the damage occurred, why it occurred, what caused the buildings to fail, the Walmart, the Home Depot, Greenbrier Nursing Home, what caused these buildings to fail. Interestingly, they said that multifamily homes performed better due to the use of, quote, robust hurricane connectors. So some of the apartment buildings and multiple homes were built better, were better wind engineered, and they performed better in the Joplin tornado. That's a lesson for all of us.
And you pointed out some statistics there, Bruce, in the chat that are pretty phenomenal. You want to share a couple of those, maybe the highlights?
Well, yeah, population affected by the tornado was 20,820 people were actually directly affected by it. 87% of the fatalities were inside a building. So like Kim said, a lot of the people were doing the right thing. They were getting indoors. But again, 60% of the fatalities were in the EF4, EF5 zone, which means the homes were completely destroyed. And only 82% of the homes have a basement. So if the home's completely destroyed and you're not in a basement, then you're prone to get the multiple blunt force trauma injuries. And that was the #1 fatality factor in Joplin, was being hit by all of that debris. So, you know, if we had a national building code that said you've got to have a hardened room inside the first floor of every building in America, a kitchen pantry, a closet, a bathroom, 3 layers of 3/4 inch plywood, bolted and directly connected into the concrete foundation, that would save a lot of lives.
Yeah, I agree.
Outstanding. And Jeff, we'll pass the torch to you. You got a pick of the week?
Yeah, pick of the week. Something I'll plug one of the pictures I got this week. May 26th up in Southwest Nebraska, I had 3 tornadoes on the ground at the same time, which was spectacular. And also, I look forward to all the people, not only in this panel, but all the people in the weather community coming to Tulsa, Oklahoma for NWA. It's happening this year on August the 21st to 25th. I can't wait to have everybody here. We look forward to it. It's going to be an awesome, awesome event. I can't wait to get together with everybody. It's going to be an awesome event in downtown Tulsa. We get to share technology and stories. And the best thing is we get to see everybody in person. And we miss everybody. And I wish everybody, I hope everybody gets to come to Tulsa. It's going to be awesome. Look forward to seeing everybody here.
It's just around the corner. There's no question
right.
about it. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for all your input tonight. And for
thank
that
you.
great pick. Andy, thank you so much for joining us. I know it wasn't easy to come on and do this, and you
Thanks,
did
Andy.
it with grace and aplomb, and we appreciate that. Did you want to share anything else before we adjourn?
I guess a pick as well. The National Service Springfield put a nice story map together on the 10th year commemoration of the Joplin tornado that summarizes the event and really tributes the community of Joplin for their resiliency, which really is I think, the credible story in all of this, is how they responded, resiliency of the community to build back.
Yep.
Outstanding. Well, thank you for sticking around to the bitter end tonight, Andy. My picks of the week are the guests coming up on WeatherBrains. Next week, we're going to have James Adelot, friend of ours, who we will have to call Dr. James Adelot before long, as he's on his PhD program now. We're really looking forward to a fun night with him. On the 14th, we'll have Mike Bates, the fellow who's recreating the Weather Star, the famous Weather Channel piece of equipment. We've got an open date on the 21st. We got to fill that. But then Kim's got Harold Brooks and Pauline Swick coming on the 28th. And then on the 12th of July, we have Spire Met, Chris Manchek, who will join us. And so those are going to be outstanding shows coming up. But we got some openings there. So if you got a guest suggestion, just hit email at weatherbrains.com. It'll come to me. Any tips you can give me to how to find that person or contact them, that is greatly appreciated. But WeatherBrains is the weekly netcast. It's all about weather. We generally do it on Monday nights. I'm saying that as we do this one on Tuesday night because of the holiday. But until next Monday night when we're here with James Adelot, I'm guest booking officer Bill Murray telling you to keep an eye to the sky because you'll always have something fun to look at. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you,
Doug.
everybody. Thanks for the invite.
Have fun tonight. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, great show tonight. Look forward to listening to this one this week. But listen, thank you guys for watching. Got to run really quickly. We'll be back.